So, Amy, I am really excited to sit down with you and discuss what I think has become one of my favorite books.
I'm so glad that we listened to it the other day. I love Tuesdays with Morrie.
I love Tuesdays with Morrie's too. Shout out to Paul Randall, one of my friends who I had on the podcast a few weeks ago. He threw out the recommendation. I had always heard of it, but had never read it. Do you remember the first time you read it?
Oh, it was many years ago. I read it when it was popular. Um, it was many years ago. I think I read it on a plane when I was flying somewhere.
Oh, wow. Would that have been probably like in the early to mid 2000s?
I would guess so.
Okay. I know it was written like in the mid 90s.
It's a fantastic book though. It's just very inspirational. Makes you feel good, and it makes you cry a lot.
It makes you cry a lot. We actually listened to it on Audible. A couple days ago, we were taking our little trip for my birthday, December 29th, and the new year. And we actually decided to listen to it on Audible. And it's actually read by the author, Mitch Albom, which I thought gave it a really just interesting and kind of beautiful take
I
on
thought
it.
that was a cool experience listening to it, read by the author.
Yeah, and we were both in tears
I know it was
for much of the
ridiculous.
book.
I tried not to cry.
Yeah, so if you're a guy and you don't like to cry, you need to read the book because it's gonna get you to cry.
I think you told me on the way up there that it was suggested to you as dealing with grief. Like that's kind of how people were kind of using it in the experience of the person that you were talking to. That it was
Yeah, no, the guy that I was talking to, he was in a grief course, grief and bereavement course, and it was one of the books on the reading list. And I think over the years when I've had people recommend it or have talked about it, it's always been in the context of, someone in their life passing or them wanting to kind of think about grief. So I think it definitely applies to that.
yeah. You know what though? I could see that if you read it, as in like dealing with grief, like after someone you cared about passed away, I think it would make you feel sad about maybe some of the moments you didn't spend with them.
Oh, absolutely. No, and I'm hoping we kind of get to that because that's one of the themes in the book is connecting how you think about death to how you think about life. But let's not go there yet because that's one of the quotes that I'm going to read. Now, before we start, I just want to say that we actually have a third guest in the podcast studio today. This is Bear.
Hi, Bear.
And so he's going to join us. I'm not sure he's going to contribute much.
But if we kick him out, then he'll be like all up in our business.
Yeah, you'll
so.
hear the scratches in the door. So Bear is one lazy son of a bitch, but we love him.
Don't say that about my baby. He's my
And
favorite.
he'll probably just sleep. And if you hear some snorts, that's not any kind of like special effects. That's our dog.
It wasn't me.
Yeah, it wasn't me or it wasn't Amy. The other thing that I want to say before we jump into the book is we are actually enjoying, cheers.
Oh my God, the best old fashions my husband can make. The most amazing old
I
fashions.
think these may be the best old fashions ever made, but just to break down the elements, so we bought this incredible Old Forester 136 proof bourbon at Federal Grill. Shout out to Raul, who I want to have on the podcast. He's, I think, the general manager there. Mm-hmm. And so he recommended the bourbon. And then I think it's called Eli Mason old fashioned cocktail mix, and then some Luxardo cherries. And then shout out to my clients, you know who you are, who gave us incredible oranges from California. Mixed it all together, and it is a wonderful fucking old fashioned.
Fine old fashioned.
Yes, so we're going to be enjoying that as we discuss the book. And I guess we'll go ahead and jump in, and let me just say what I'm hoping we do tonight is I've gone ahead and I've highlighted some of our favorite quotes from the book after discussing it quite a bit over the last few days. I hope we get to all of them, but depending on the time, we may not. So what I'm going to do is just kind of work through the different quotes, and then we can just kind of see where it goes from there. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good to me. If we don't get there, we'll just have to do a second episode.
Okay, that'll be good.
Morrie's worth it.
Morrie is worth it, yes. So for anybody who's listening who doesn't know what the book is about, Um, I want to go ahead and play from the author's words. This is a part of the beginning of the book. I went ahead and just kind of recorded it from the Audible version. It kind of sets up the premise of the book, and then I may say a couple other words, and then we'll get into some of our favorite quotes so we can offer our therapeutic interpretation of this amazing book. Okay, here we go.
The last class of my old professor's life took place once a week in his house, by a window in the study where he could watch a small hibiscus plant shed its pink leaves. The class met on Tuesdays. It began after breakfast. The subject was the meaning of life. It was taught from experience. No grades were given, but there were oral exams each week. You were expected to respond to questions, and you were expected to pose questions of your own. You were also required to perform physical tasks now and then, such as lifting the professor's head to a comfortable spot on the pillow, or placing his glasses on the bridge of his nose. Kissing him goodbye earned you extra credit. No books were required, yet many topics were covered, including love, work, community, family, aging, forgiveness, and finally, death. The last lecture was brief, only a few words. A funeral was held in lieu of graduation. Although no final exam was given, you were expected to produce one long paper on what was learned. That paper is presented here. The last class of my old professor's life had only one student. I was the student.
Yeah. Oh man, so good.
That's great.
So to give just a little bit more background, and please just fill in wherever I'm missing. Um, you have this guy Mitch who was a college student, I think in the 70s, maybe it's the 80s, I forget. And he befriends this professor, Morrie Schwartz, and pretty much takes every class he can from him.
I have to
Go
say
go
though,
ahead.
Morrie seems like someone that everyone would befriend. He was so kind.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had a professor quite like Maury, but the ones that really reminded me of him always had like flocks of students around them,
Hanging out in their offices.
hanging out in their offices, going out for drinks, just hanging out and doing life with them because they had that kind of relational energy, that relational power, that connection with people. Yeah. And it's funny, I think it was one of the favorite lines in the book for you that Mitch would always say when I met Morrie and I got to know him, I didn't know if I should give him a hug or a napkin because in some ways he was like a fucking slob, right? Like he would eat his egg salad and just let all the stuff fly out of his teeth.
Kind of like our pug.
Kind of like the pug, yeah. So extremely relational. So going back to the kind of the background, he's a student. He connects with Morrie. They end up sort of walking around campus every Tuesday. They develop a pretty deep relationship. Mitch ends up doing his thesis on how sports resembles religiosity in the United States, and Morrie Schwartz is his advisor. Anyways, years and years go by. Mitch had promised Morrie that he would stay connected, but he didn't, like a typical man, I would argue. And one day, Mitch, who at this point has become a very successful sports analyst, journalist, writer, making a ton of money, workaholic, sees a CNN, I think, special with Ted Koppel. And it's about Morrie, wrestling with his impending death. And so this causes Mitch to reach out to Morrie and to reconnect. And to fast forward a little bit, the book is a result of their meeting every Tuesday for what seems like a few months.
Yeah,
To
every chapter is like another Tuesday that they
Yeah,
met.
exactly. Every chapter is a different Tuesday. I can't remember exactly how many
It was
Tuesdays.
like 11,
11, 12 maybe.
something like that.
And the point is for Morrie to kind of pass on his wisdom, not only during his life, but in these last sort of moments of his life as he's wrestling with death. And it's just this beautiful story. I almost wanted to say a love story. And I actually want to go ahead and just say that it is a love story. Obviously, not in a romantic way, but in a way that maybe we can unpack in a little bit because it
It's
shows,
a very relational story for sure.
yeah, the tenderness and the vulnerability and just the connection of these two men, which one of the things you pointed out on our drive while we were listening to it that I didn't get until you said it, but now I can't help but see it through this lens, is that this is a beautiful example of what a healthy, connected, tender, vulnerable masculinity could look like. I think this book is ultimately about masculinity.
It can be, for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to reduce it to that, obviously, but if we're looking at it from that lens, I think it has a lot to teach us.
You know, one of the interesting things that struck me, like relationally from the very beginning of this book, is how when Mitch reaches out to Morrie and says, "Hey, do you remember me?" He's not even sure that Morrie's going to remember him. And Morrie, of course, welcomes him with open arms and says, "Why didn't you call me Coach?"
Yeah.
You know, like, because they had a pet, and like, because
Yeah,
Mitch
they
had
had
a
these like
name for him.
pet nicknames for each other. And yeah, he's like, why didn't you call me Coach?
And I think that happens to people. I don't know. You run into someone from your past, like maybe someone from high school, and you're kind of like, oh my God, are they going to remember me? But I remember them. And when you talk, you're like, oh my God, of course I remember you.
Right.
Like relationally, I think we underestimate how we affect other people sometimes.
That's a great point, Amy. I don't want to speak for everyone, but man, the times that I have not reached out to an old friend or an old point of contact because I was afraid either they wouldn't remember me or they wouldn't see me the same way. And when I've had the courage to go ahead and do it anyways, it's been great reconnecting. So yeah, that's powerful.
What's that quote about? You probably know because you're better at this stuff than me, about how people will never, they won't remember the things that you do or the things that you say, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
That's Maya Angelou, one of my favorite
Yeah,
poets.
I love
Yes.
Maya Angelou.
Yes. You know, I've actually thought about that quote in terms of the real power of therapy, which obviously is what we do as a profession. But therapy is not just how we make a person feel, but it's a huge part of it.
Of course it is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I want to go ahead and jump into these quotes that I've sort of highlighted and just kind of see where the conversation goes, Amy. So this is, I think, near the beginning of the book. It starts with Morrie speaking to Mitch, and Morrie says, "Have I told you about the tension of opposites?" The tension of opposites. Life is a series of pulls back and forth. You want to do one thing, but you're bound to do something else. Something hurts you, yet you know it shouldn't. You take certain things for granted, even when you know you should never take anything for granted. A tension of opposites, like a pull on a rubber band. And most of us live somewhere in the middle. Sounds like a wrestling match, Mitch said. A wrestling match? He laughs. Yes, you could describe life that way. So which side wins? Mitch asks. Which side wins? He smiles at me, the crinkled eyes, the crooked teeth. Love wins. Love always wins.
This is my favorite point of the book.
Okay, I knew that it would be. That's why I wanted to start there. Okay, why is it the favorite part of your book? What speaks to you about this idea of the tension of opposites?
Oh, because it speaks to my life philosophy. And you know this, I talk about it all the time. It's probably till I'm blue in the face, until you're sick of hearing about it, about how when someone falls one place on the spectrum, they always fall the other place. When I work with teenagers and they come in and they say, I don't care about anything. I don't care what people think about me. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, if you don't care about what people think about you, then there is a piece of you that cares very deeply about it. Or someone who says, I'm not emotional, then that tells me that somewhere they're very, very sensitive, because life is about balance. And I always encourage people to try to live more in the middle, because when you live on one of the opposites, it's really hard because you bounce back and forth like a rubber band.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Do you think this union of the opposites, or the tension of the opposites, is maybe connected to the Chinese philosophy of the yin and yang?
Oh, absolutely.
Order, disorder.
It's probably one of my favorite tools to use in therapy.
Yeah. How
The
so?
black and the white, because there's always good in the bad and there's always bad in the good.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look for each.
Yes, we do. And to be careful not to separate them too quickly.
I think it's something that Morrie does beautifully, throughout the book is he talks about, with his illness, like with ALS. Okay, ALS, I don't have any experience with it, but it sounds like a horrible, horrible disease to go through.
You literally die of suffocation. Oh, and yeah, we should have mentioned that's what he's diagnosed with. Morrie Schwartz. He finds out that he has Lou Gehrig's or ALS, which for many people, the sort of cognitive aspects of your life remain. So you're just as sharp as ever, but your what is it? Your
The
muscle functions
physicality, yeah, your muscle functions.
and everything kind of disintegrates, and many people just kind of die of suffocation because the lungs are the last thing to kind of go. You end up getting to the point where you can't walk. I mean, as he points out, he has someone to wipe his ass. He can't wipe his own ass. Can't feed himself. It's fucking terrible.
Yeah, but one of the things that amazes me is he talks about how in the morning, he cries every morning about how terrible it is. However, he tries to set limits for, okay, I allow myself to feel that and to feel it deeply. And then I try to figure out how I can live my life that day and enjoy the time I've been given. And then you know this, that one of my favorite parts of the book is when Morrie calls himself lucky. But he's not saying he's lucky he has ALS. He says that he's lucky that, or at least that he can see that even though he's in the process of dying, he knows he's in the process of dying, which gives him the ultimate ability to say goodbye the way he wants to.
Yeah.
To know that he's leaving this earth or leaving his body, and to choose how to do that where, other people have sudden deaths and they don't necessarily get that opportunity.
Right. Yeah. No, and this book is not a simplistic self-help. You're not going to get these cheap platitudes. It's very profound. It's written from a man who was deeply suffering, but who also had his pulse on what life is ultimately about. And so there's some depth there that's incredible. And you're right. I mean, one of the things he says is he had to kind of work on this mindset, which is something I hope we get to, that it didn't just come naturally for him. But in having ALS, one of the things he did through it was to actually learn to appreciate the parts of his body that he did have some control over. It actually forced him to be grateful for noticing different parts of his body that he said he never would have paid attention to if he hadn't had ALS. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
Yeah. And at the same time, he talks about the devastation of being diagnosed with ALS, and
Yeah.
especially at the very beginning when he couldn't believe that that was the diagnosis. That
Right,
it was a very grim prognosis.
Well, because this was a man who loved to dance. In fact, at one point in the book, Mitch asked him, if you had kind of a perfect day and you were in perfect health, what would you do? And I can't remember every aspect. It was actually very simple and basic, but he would end the day with friends, dancing his heart away, and then, having a really good night's sleep. So he loved to be physical. He loved to move around. So this, in some ways, this disease, this diagnosis was, yeah, like you said, fucking devastating for him
It took
because
his favorite thing.
it took his favorite thing away.
That was the first thing to go.
Yeah.
His favorite thing.
Yeah, he was in a wheelchair for most of the time when they kind of had their Tuesday sessions.
But I think it also, in a good way, it illustrates how important our bodies are. Like, the body keeps the score, how important movement is in dance. And dance is such an important, body movement is an important part of spirituality, a part of daily life.
Yeah,
Can be.
absolutely.
Part of healing.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to speak too, I guess authoritatively on this because I'm not an authority on this, but one of the things that I'm actively trying to research and understand for myself personally, for my clients, for this podcast, is ways in which masculinity becomes disembodied and how that can create a lot of problems. I think it's connected to how we have our ambivalent relationship to emotions and how we don't take care of ourselves physically, a lot of the time. So you bringing up the importance of embodiment just rings a bell for me. It's something that I want to continue to explore on this podcast, is ways that men can think about their bodies in really holistic and healthy ways.
Well, and we were talking about how opposites embody how opposites live within us. And I think when you embody one side of the spectrum, and you just really hang on to it, how it causes dysregulation because there's a piece of you that wants to get out.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That's a great point, Amy. Yeah. Now, what one maybe last thing on the tension of opposites, I had to bring this guy up. I think I bring him up in almost every episode because he's one of my favorite philosophers. He's the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus. He's probably most famous for saying, you can't step into the same river twice. He was the guy who believed everything is change, everything's in flux. But one of the things that he also held to be a fundamental dimension of reality, right? At the very core of the universe is what he called the tension of the opposites. And I wanted to read this fragment. We only have one book of aphorisms that he kind of left us. It's entitled The Fragments. And I'm always telling people, if you're interested in getting into philosophy at any level, I know it can be very intimidating, start with Heraclitus and The Fragments. They're very easy to understand. It's a really short read. You can almost read one a day, and they're almost devotional. They have a lot to kind of get you to think about. But this is fragment number 56. The cosmos, or the universe, or the world, works by the harmony of tensions, right? Which is another way of saying the harmony or the tension of opposites. And he says, it's just like the lyre and the bow. And I want you to think about that image for a second, right? A lyre was kind of an ancient musical stringed instrument. You can almost think of a guitar, right? Or like a bow and arrow. If the string is too loose, then you're not going to be able to shoot the arrow out. The music's not going to be produced. But if it's too tight, it's going to have almost the opposite. It'll crack, it'll pop, it won't be effective. And so it's about finding the balance between, in this analogy, something that's too loose or too tight. And I just love that this guy was saying at the very heart of reality is this kind of putting together or coming together of the opposites. I think that informs so much of how I view the world, how I think about relationships.
Absolutely. It brings up for me too, like, and I wish I could remember more about this story right now, but have you heard the story about the Native American story about the two wolves?
I love that story.
I
Yes.
love that story too, where maybe you can talk. I can't remember the two wolves. Like, I can't remember what one side was and what the other side was.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I know there's different iterations of it, but, it's like this Native American grandfather sits with his grandson and kind of tells him a fable or kind of one of their myths around the two wolves. And, one wolf is, kind of the light wolf or the good wolf. The other wolf is the dark wolf, the wolf that's kind of surrounded by kind of nefarious purposes or whatever. And they're always at odds. They're kind of warring back and forth. And the boy looks at his grandfather and says, which one wins? And then the grandfather says, the one that you feed.
Well, and the thing that strikes me in all of this is that Morrie seems to feed one wolf more than he feeds the other, for sure.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe can we hold this opposite, that on the one hand, he doesn't deny the existence of the bad wolf. Maybe in some ways he
accepts and appreciates that wolf.
Yeah. In fact, if I can, another shout out to Paul, he brought to mind when we were in grad school together. One of the authors we had to read was Henry Nouwen, who was this wonderful Catholic spiritual author, and he talked about befriending, we could say, the bad wolf, or befriending the pain, befriending the dark side, the suffering. That's not to say that we revel in it and love it and, oh yeah, this is great. No, I mean, at some level we still like fucking hate it, but befriending it is giving it space to exist.
Awareness,
acceptance,
and giving it moments to feel.
giving it moments to feel. And we're going to get into that because there's a great quote that Morrie kind of unpacks some of this. But to your point, you're right. I think Morrie feeds the good wolf, and I think that's a message to think about and to wrestle with.
It's what makes him easy to be around, and it's why people, I think, keep coming back to hear his stories about life.
Yeah. By the way, you can find there was a TV movie made with, I think it's Jack Lemmon was Morrie Schwartz. I don't remember the actor for Mitch. You'd recognize him if you saw him. You can actually find the movie free on YouTube, but I was kind of disappointed.
It was a fantastic movie, but I have to say the book is like 1,000 times better.
Yeah, I was just texting with a friend about this. I think most times they are, right? The books are always better than the movies.
You cannot substitute that movie for the book.
No. So if you're listening to this and you're intrigued by the idea, the premise of the book, please, if you don't like to read, like, get Audible and just listen to it. Don't just watch the movie because you'll miss a lot.
We listened to the book on the way to Louisiana. It was like, 3.5 hours to our destination, and we listened to the entire book.
Yeah.
On our trip.
Yeah. I think
one way.
You know, I do have a pretty good memory. I think the book on Audible is like 3 hours and 50 minutes. Because it's the 25th anniversary. So it has like this appendix on it, which is just giving you a little bit of background. So, but if you listen to just the book, you can do it in about 3.5 hours.
And the appendix added a lot to it. So
yeah, that was sweet. Okay. Yeah. All right. You ready to move on to the next quote?
I guess so.
Okay. Dying, Morrie suddenly said, is only one thing to be sad over, Mitch. Living unhappily is something else. So many of the people who come to visit me are unhappy. Why? Well, for one thing, the culture we have does not make people feel good about themselves. We're teaching the wrong things. And you have to be strong enough to say, if the culture doesn't work, don't buy it. Create your own. Most people can't do it. They're more unhappy than me, even in my current condition. Damn, that's pretty powerful.
That's pretty powerful. That's deep.
So one of the questions I had for you, Amy, was when he says, the culture does not make people feel good about themselves. So that was written in the mid-90s. Let's look at, God, it's now literally 2023. It's January 1st, 2023, right? We're in the 21st century. Do you think our culture is any better?
No.
Do you think the culture makes us feel good about ourselves? And if not, how so?
Well, let's be fair about this. First, I want to say no. But, I think one of the cool things about Morrie, the reason he teaches this class about life is that he has such an interesting take on things. His perspectives are fresh and different, but they're not wrong. Whenever you hear it, you go, wow, that's exactly what it's exactly the opposite of what I was thinking, but still very, very true.
But it resonates, huh?
It really resonates. Like him talking about being lucky about the fact that he knows he's going to die, that he gets time. He gets to tell people how he gets, so one of the funny things about the movie that was different than the book.
Yeah.
This is the one part I really enjoyed about the movie that they didn't really talk about in the book is Morrie throwing his own funerals. He has several of them, and he says that the reason he does that is because he wants to hear all the good things people have to say about him before he goes.
So there's a sense in which that actually did make it in the book. He mentions that he actually has like a funeral while he's still alive, which I think is a great idea.
And the movie says that he does it several times.
So, yeah, right. So the movie mentions that he does it several times.
I think Mitch shows up at the end and says, well, I didn't get a chance to speak. And I think Morrie says, well, you can speak at the next one. Which I just loved. Because I've heard people who have, people I know in my past that have passed who say things like, I don't want you to have a funeral. I want you to have a celebration of my life. I want it to be one really big fucking party, and I'm going to leave some money for you to do that.
Yeah.
They don't want you to be, it's not they don't want you to be sad. I mean, you get to cry and tell the stories. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been to a funeral that didn't have really positive stories about the person who passed, where you're like, wow, I'm learning more about this person. I'm realizing they had sides that I never saw.
Right. Absolutely. Man, talk about the tension of the opposites. I think the most powerful funerals I've been to have held both the deep sadness and grief, but also the joy and the celebration.
Absolutely. But this whole creating your own culture, I think it's something Mari did really, really well, was kind of not only acknowledging that there were some really shitty things about having ALS and about the process of going through it, but he's really honest with himself about the crappiness of the process. And then that also gave him space to enjoy some of the aspects of the process, the thing you can't control, being able to look at it and going, well, I'm going to choose to think about it differently because that's what works for me.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think too, when I kind of sit back and wrestle with his statement about, the culture does not make us feel good about ourselves. I don't know. I think about being a man. I think about my work with masculinity. Maybe you could speak to women and teenagers in a moment, but I think about messages around, how much you have to work to feel like you're productive in terms of like how much money you need to have in your bank account. I think about as a guy, the type of car that you drive, or, God, this is a terrible phrase, but so many of the teenagers I work with talk about, pulling bitches as kind of the sign or the symbol that you've kind of arrived as a guy, and or just messages in our culture around masculinity. You shouldn't cry, you shouldn't express emotion. All those things, if we just listen to them and live them out, do not make us feel good about ourselves if we're honest.
No, I think for women, it's about our bodies and about sexuality.
Okay. I get the component around the body, right? Like, I guess a woman, maybe in the United States culture, feel or is told that the message is you have to have a certain body
Oh,
type,
absolutely.
right? To be valuable and accepted. But when it comes to sexuality, what's the message that doesn't make women feel good about
Well, first of
themselves?
all, it's not just a body. I mean, look at the Kardashians. It's a created body that doesn't exist that we're supposed to have.
Yeah.
But then you,
I remember Brene, excuse me one second. I remember Brene Brown writing, I forget in which book. I think it's The Gifts of Imperfection, but damn it, I can't remember now. Where she's like, look, at least at that point, this was probably in the early 2000s, the ideal female body, which is like a really flat waist, a huge ass, and giant breasts, for most women, naturally speaking, biologically speaking, is not really possible without some kind of like crazy work being done.
oh, I mean, think about it.
So the ideal is not even humanly possible.
It goes back way beyond the Kardashians. If you look at the Barbie doll, like the measurements of a Barbie doll and the ratios. So I saw someone had done some research on the Barbie doll. We're talking, I don't even know when the Barbie doll came out, but it was a long time ago. Probably in the 40s, 50s. I don't
Probably.
know.
Yeah.
That if a woman had the same ratio of, breasts, waist, and hips, she would fall over. She wouldn't be able to walk.
Yeah. I remember reading that too. That's
So,
fucking crazy.
but and that's how we introduce young girls to here's what the female anatomy should look like.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
But then sexuality, that's the whole tension of, you're supposed to be beautiful and sexual, but not have sex because that makes you a slut.
Got you.
But if you're not sexual, then you're a prude. So there's like really no winning that battle.
Man, talk about feeling stuck.
But
Jeez.
I think there's men who struggle with their bodies and body image and
Sure.
those things too. And
Sure.
maybe in a different way, but
Yeah.
for sure.
Not to out anyone, obviously, but I end up working with quite a few men who really find a lot of purpose and value and significance in lifting weights. And I've worked with a few over the years who, would even be considered like bodybuilders. And when we get to a certain level of intimacy and vulnerability in our relationship, in the therapeutic context, they start talking about some of the body image issues they see in those settings and in themselves. And yeah, it's present in the male psyche as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So, okay, so one last thing about that quote. I guess, do you have any thoughts on what Morrie means by, if the culture doesn't work, which obviously it doesn't, you've got to create your own. How do we do that?
I think he's talking about finding your own safe place, finding your own way to exist within a culture that maybe has these norms that, or has these beliefs or things that we're supposed to attain that aren't even attainable. He's saying, okay, so acknowledge these things that we're trying to work on to try and create like a certain body image or whatever, and then also have a level of acceptance and just being comfortable with the fact that, you know, perfection in the imperfection, not being perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think to establish this almost alternative culture, you need to have, I don't want to say like-minded because that has like a political implication that I don't like, but you need to have maybe a small community or just a handful of people that share similar values that can just encourage you and yeah, just kind of like spur you on into the kind of life that you want as a type of like social support system.
Well, that's the relational side of me. My relational
Right.
background comes
Right.
out and all of that. I think it's about finding a place to just be uniquely you and be able to just be that. And I think that's something Morrie exemplifies. And it's part of what makes people so comfortable around him is his vulnerability. He's like, I acknowledge that I'm like losing bodily function. Someone's going to have to wipe my ass.
Someone's gonna have to
And
wipe my ass, and they
that's,
do. They have to pick him up and move him different places. It's yeah,
and at the
it's really
same
humbling.
time, he finds his way to be that way and let it happen and to be able to say, you know what? I'm comfortable with this, is with the fact that this is who I am because it's part of the process.
Yeah, no, that's good, Amy. So one of the things I think about when it comes to this kind of call or this task to kind of create your own alternative culture is over the last few months I've started this group for neurodivergent teenage boys, and it's not perfect and it's definitely rough around the edges, but gosh, we love each other in a very kind of appropriate way, and we just create space for just difference and being radically yourself in a safe environment. And we talk about so much deep stuff, so many significant issues, but I feel kind of safer to be myself. I feel, hopeful that I can be my weird neurodivergent self because others are encouraging me to do so and providing me a safe space to do that. So I don't know. I think in some ways it's about finding your people, finding your tribe, and figuring out ways to do life together. It doesn't have to be anything official like, an institutional church, although that works for a lot of people. I think you can find creative ways of, establishing relationships and communities that support you and your lifestyle.
I think it's a cool space. It sounds like for people who are neurodivergent to just, first of all, acknowledge their, I guess what we could call shortcomings, the things that their differences, the things that make them different than other people or make them maybe not feel like they always fit in, and to work towards maybe fitting in sometimes, but at the same time, acknowledging that it's beautiful to not fit in sometimes.
Absolutely.
You don't have to always be exactly like everyone else.
Oh, absolutely. And talk about the tension of the opposites. I feel like in almost every session or every group, we kind of start out by just offering empathy for each other in terms of like the bullying that's gone on that week or the ways that people have just been complete assholes toward them. And then we try to end, kind of crescendo and then end with some kind of positive, note where we're affirming each other or just encouraging each other to kind of be strong and move forward despite the fact that people can be just real shitty. So,
Oh, people can be shitty.
yes.
But I think it's learning to live within that and to not.
I can be shitty too, right?
Yes, you can. I live with you. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, you're never shitty.
I don't know. You make a really good old fashioned. That you do well. But at the end of the day, like I don't know. I just think it's beautiful for people to, be able to acknowledge what it takes to fit into the greater culture And at the same time, to be like creating their own culture and being like, but this is my space where I can just be who I am. And I feel comfortable with that too.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
think those things are important. Vulnerability.
Agreed. Okay,
Absolutely.
let's go to the
Which
third one.
leads right into our third talking
Yes.
point.
Okay, so this is one of my favorite
We are
quotes.
going to have to do it. Look at this. Look at these talking points. We're going to have to do another episode.
Oh yeah. Okay, maybe we'll get to three or maybe four. So, okay, you can't substitute material things for love or for gentleness or for tenderness or for a sense of camaraderie. Money is not a substitute for tenderness, and power is not a substitute for tenderness. I can tell you as I'm sitting here dying, when you most need it, neither money nor power will give you the feeling you're looking for, no matter how much of them that you have. And to me, the key word there is, tenderness, or maybe another way to put it is kindness, gentleness. And I'm wanting to say quite a few things right now about masculinity and some of the things that I struggle with in terms of how masculinity gets framed. But before I just kind of go on my little hobby horse, what do you hear in that quote when you hear Morrie kind of making this distinction between tenderness, gentleness, kindness, and then like money and power and all that kind of stuff?
I can tell you the first thing that strikes me is the way that Morrie is. It makes it really clear in the book that no matter who comes over, Morrie likes to be kissed on the forehead. He likes
male,
hugs.
female, child, adult, it doesn't matter. He gives people a kiss.
He does. And one of the other really important parts of the book is where Mitch asks the nurse. The nurse is trying to move Morrie from his wheelchair into his recliner.
Yeah.
And Mitch says, "Will you show me how to do it?" And the nurse shows him how to put her arms around him. And she says, "You're not going to get any help from him because he can't." And I think Mitch just sees it as an opportunity to help, just to be kind. But he picks Morrie up and he holds him. And Morrie's, see, it's making me teary. Morrie's head falls against his shoulder. And it's a really tender moment where I think Mitch doesn't expect to feel that connection, but it's like a deep connection that they feel with each other. Just helping someone move from their wheelchair to their chair, which just seems practical, turns into something that's a tender, loving moment.
Yeah. Oh, man. Tenderness, right? I think being connected to vulnerability, which is about kind of exposing oneself to another. It's about physical touch, being open to getting hurt, but also the only way that we can connect. That was one thing that, brought me to tears too was, Mitch records in the book that kind of by the end of their sessions, I think close to when Morrie was going to pass, they would just hold hands the whole time. Like their Tuesdays together had not just been about exchanging ideas, but it was about holding each other literally. And the power for me of two men sitting there and doing that is just incredible.
Well, and the vulnerability that comes out because, Mitch is having in the book, Mitch is having some issues in his own relationship. He's having
He
trouble
can't
committing and connecting. And he records the sessions with Morrie and he turns off the recorder and says, "Can I talk to you about something personal?" And Morrie says, "Why are you turning off the recorder?" And he encourages him to turn it back on because it's one of their moments together, even though it's not necessarily directly about Morrie.
Yeah, no, that's really good. It's interesting in terms of thinking about tenderness, the touch, the kiss. I remember this is going to get into some masculinity kind of shit. So, coming from Latin America, I can't speak for every, country because there's obviously some differences and nuances. But where I'm from, Puerto Rico, it's very common for men when they're greeting each other to kind of give each other a kiss on the cheek. I mean, I know that's true in different Middle Eastern cultures and different cultures that aren't kind of a part of the West. Anyways, I remember as a kid, my dad always, giving me a kiss on the cheek, and he would do that even as he dropped me off at school. And man, I remember the process of being socialized into seeing that. I don't remember the exact terms, but maybe sadly as something gay or something you don't do with your dad. And so, man, I remember the first time that I pushed my dad away and said, "You got to stop that. Like, stop kissing me." And man, that almost brings tears to my eyes just thinking about that. And there's an author who's from Africa. Damn it, I can't remember his name, but he's written this great book on masculinity, and he talks about his experience of growing up, I think in London, where his family was from, grown ass men, right? From teenage years through the moment they die, they walk around their tribe, they walk around their community holding hands. And it's not seen as a homosexual thing, which wouldn't be wrong in my eyes, but they just do that because it's a symbol of their bond, of their friendship. And he's like, when he got to the West, he was socialized out of doing that and couldn't really understand why. So it's just interesting how masculinity gets framed, at least in our culture, as kind of distance and a lack of touch, unless it's sort of this erotic touch toward a woman and it's like conquering them. I think that's one of the things that we almost need to recover.
You know what, though?
It's physical touch.
The interesting thing that you say about that, but like, I married into a Puerto Rican family. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, so did my little brother. Married a woman from Puerto Rico. And I can say that at family gatherings, like before I even met you, just going to meet her family, the first thing you do is hug you, kiss you on both cheeks. And it was so awkward at first because that's not something I'm used to. And I'm a Texan. I'm used to hugging. We hug. We love each other, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I had a boyfriend where we went up to like Chicago to see his family, and they were kind of cold. I mean, I'm like, come on, bring it in. Let's get a hug. And they're like, that's so like they were so uncomfortable.
Right.
And so it's just interesting, the human way of being, like how socially, I mean, and culturally, like going back to the create your own culture. Culturally, it can be just like being touchy feely, and our circle of what's comfortable is different.
Sure. Yeah, no, agreed. I guess as we think about Tuesdays with Morrie's as a book that is both addressing and then portraying what I think a healthy masculinity could look like, I think this idea of tenderness and kindness and even physical touch, men touching men, is one very important thing that kind of needs to be wrestled with.
As a therapist, it's like one of my favorite parts of the book.
Yeah, no, me too. I love how they held hands near the end. Now, okay, I've got to bring in Marcus Aurelius.
Your favorite person in the world.
Well, I do really enjoy him. His meditations, I think, are a book that every person should read at least once. He has a lot of problems. There's a lot about his thinking that I'm conflicted about. So
his life kind of sucked, man.
his life was horrible, which in some ways I think makes his writing even that much more powerful, because you gotta think this motherfucker was the most powerful man literally on the planet, and he writes this private diary which was never supposed to be published, with him kind of exhorting himself to be better, to be a good person, to kind of rein in his anger, practice self-control. Whereas now, shit, you look on Twitter, you turn on the news, and our leaders are narcissists, and it's all about them, and there's no self-control. It's just egotism run wild. So at that level, it's kind of refreshing to read someone with that much power really trying to kind of rein it in and actually be a good person. But were you going to say something?
I was just thinking it's interesting, some of the modern parallels between Morrie and Marcus Aurelius.
You got any that come to mind?
No. Oh, well, just both of them living in very difficult situations and trying to make the best of it.
Oh, yeah.
Making their own culture. Both of them did that.
I like that. Yes, I hadn't thought about that. Yes, they both, I think, tried to cultivate their own culture. So, okay, part of why I want to bring him up is,
Besides your man crush on him.
okay, besides my man, I have a man crush on so many guys, okay, but Morrie Schwartz is now my latest one. But yes, I would say Marcus Aurelius is another one. I want to bring him up because I think a lot of people, when they hear, oh God, a Stoic philosopher, isn't that like the epitome of toxic masculinity, right? Being stoic, unemotional, stiff upper lip. And I want to argue that's a really bad understanding of Stoicism. And that Marcus actually embodies a very different approach to being a man and to handling emotions. In fact, and I want to kind of read a segment from his meditations in just a moment. He's actually countering what I would argue was an ancient Roman version of what today we might call a toxic masculinity, which I think resembles it exactly. Very tough. Just like today, for a lot of men, the only quote unquote appropriate emotion to display is like anger. Well, it was almost seen as kind of like a virtue in certain circles to just be violent and just extreme in your anger. And here's what Marcus actually has to say about that. He actually sees that as quite unmanly. He says, keep this thought. And remember, he's writing to himself. He's not preaching to someone in a moralistic sense. He's like preaching to himself. Keep this thought handy when you feel a fit of rage coming on. It isn't manly to be enraged. Rather, gentleness and civility are more human and therefore manlier. A real man doesn't give way to anger and discontent. Such a person has strength, courage, and endurance, unlike the angry and the complaining. The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Drop the fucking mic. That's one of my favorite passages of like ancient philosophy. So when you hear that, I don't think you'd probably read that before. Does that give you a different take on who Marcus was, or what do you think he was actually saying?
Well, first of all, I listen to you talk about Marcus Aurelius with your man crush all the time. So, I mean, I think I've grown to really love this man too.
Awesome. I'd be upset if you didn't.
I don't know. A different take on all of this is how I talk to my clients all the time, my teenage clients, about anger being a secondary emotion. That it's anger is kind of almost like a safe emotion to express, especially I think for men, when you don't want to express the deeper, more vulnerable emotions, which usually are fear or sadness or being alone or being hurt. I even tell my clients they're not even allowed to say I'm angry, I'm mad, or I'm pissed off. They have to find another emotional word to express how they're feeling, and oftentimes it comes out as hurt, sadness, loneliness, fear.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But I know that's not where you were going with this, so what do you got?
No, but I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Well, I mean, just a couple things, like just a historical note. I know we were talking about this on our nightly walk this evening. So near the end of his life, Marcus actually went through like a civil war, and the guy Cassius, who was sort of, you could say, the leader on the other side that was against him, was publicly saying that, in his words, Marcus was a philosophical old woman. Which, I mean, I don't know if anyone needs me to kind of unpack that, right? On the one hand, he was the Caesar. He was like the president of his time. And he was a Stoic. He loved philosophy. So he was critiqued for maybe being too heady or stuck in the clouds. But notice the other part of the like slander. He was called an old woman, which, guys, today it's the same bullshit, right? If we cry or we show any other fucking emotion other than anger, I hate this word, but we're called what? A pussy. And so Marcus was being critiqued as unmanly back in the day, but I love what he says in that segment that I read. True manliness is not just being controlled by anger. lashing out, right? Becoming the Hulk and either physically or verbally abusing someone. True quote unquote manliness, true strength is the ability to practice self-control.
And experience vulnerability.
Absolutely. Experiencing vulnerability. In fact, as he says, and he says this in other places, true quote unquote manliness is actually kindness and gentleness. And I would argue, in light of Morrie Schwartz, tenderness, because it takes a tremendous amount of strength to actually choose the good wolf over the bad wolf. It's fucking easy to just give in to the bad wolf and just destroy yourself and others. It takes Herculean strength, real like commitment and devotion to try to go on the path that's right and that's, good for all.
Well, and it's something that Morrie does well. He talks about, I know he talks about basically the loss of his humanity's not the right word, but like just, the fact that someone's going to have to wipe his ass at some point, that's like a primal thing that like all men should be able to do.
Yeah.
And then he reframes it and talks about how he's almost moving back towards childhood, where as a baby, the only thing you want is to be held by your mother. And he gets to be held all the time when people are picking him up and moving him.
Oh, that was so powerful. Guys, can y'all hear that? Like, this man is saying there's a place in life to be held and to be carried. Maybe not literally like he was in his condition, but just let it play out. Are you allowing yourself to be held? Are you allowing yourself to be touched in vulnerable ways as an expression of being connected to life, connected to yourself, and connected to others? If not, why? What are you afraid of? What are you trying to defend?
Hey, some of the emphasis in that, like in our romantic life, about holding each other, about sometimes being the big spoon and sometimes being the little spoon.
Absolutely.
Right? We talk about this.
I enjoy both positions. I really like being the big spoon at times, but sometimes I want to be the little spoon. And I'm not afraid to say that as a man.
We should get you we should have footies, and you should be the little spoon, and I should be the big spoon.
Sounds good to me.
Hey, some of us women, sometimes we want to be the big spoon.
Absolutely. Embrace that shit.
Hey, it's hard to be the 5'2" big spoon.
It's easy to be the 6'5"
little spoon.
Yeah.
We make it work, right?
I like it. Okay, I know that you're kind of sensitive to time. We have a shit ton more quotes that I really want to get through. So I think we'll have to do a part 2. But I do want to maybe do one more. So
okay, let's do it.
So do you want to look through them and pick one?
Why don't we just move on to number 4, and then maybe tomorrow
we can do another one.
Pick back up. I have to say, he's videotaping all of this, and it's Sunday night, and I was like sitting in the living room watching TV in my jammies and hanging with my dog. So I have to apologize for showing up not camera ready.
Oh, you look great, baby.
Hey, but that's maybe some of that woman vulnerability where
there you go.
We should look like Kim Kardashian, and not today.
Not today.
Not
and
today.
And that is okay.
It's all good.
Okay, so number 4.
All right, let's do it.
And you've kind of already kind of mentioned this one, but maybe we can go a little bit deeper because this was one of my favorites. So I'll set up the context. Mitch is, I think, asking Morrie, how he's really doing and how hard the initial diagnosis was for him. And Morrie says, I give myself a good cry if I need it, but then I concentrate on all the good things still in my life, on the people who are coming to see me, on the stories I'm going to hear. I focus on you if it's Tuesday because we're Tuesday people.
Oh, I love that.
Okay. I remember when we read that or when we listened to that, you made some comments about it. It really resonated with you. I wonder why. Why did that, like, both acknowledging the pain and the suffering and letting himself have a really good cry? I think at some point he even said he hated it. He hated the fact that he had ALS.
Of course he did. He wouldn't choose it if I think you gave him the choice.
Yeah.
But But it goes kind of back to what we were talking about the like tension of opposites that and I think it really embodies healthy grieving. Being
Mm.
able to, like it's not good in grief to spend all of your time crying and mourning. It's also not good to pretend like these things aren't sad and like everything is happy, happy, joy, joy.
Like so many men, we're just gonna fucking push it down and keep going and not really feel it or talk about it.
Right. I think that's one of the beautiful things about therapy. Therapy is a space where you come in. I have so many people come in my office and they cry. And first of all, I joke that if they're not crying, I'm not a very good therapist. It's kind of my job to make them cry. But I see my office as a safe space to cry. If you're going to cry, do it here. Like, let's get it out and let's acknowledge all the negativity so that when you go out into the world, you can live the positive. And I think it's important to do both. I even know people who have found it important to schedule, like to be like, okay, I'm going to allow myself, I'm sad about this in the morning when I wake up. So I'm going to wake up 30 minutes early. I'm going to allow myself to be sad. I'm going to
Yeah.
wallow in it. But then I'm going to get in the shower and I'm going to get moving. And
Yeah.
I'm going to do the rest of the day. I think sometimes if you don't almost schedule the part where you're sad and you get to actually feel the feelings, then it becomes this repressed thing and it becomes this like tension of opposites where you feel dysregulated. If you allow yourself time to feel both, you don't feel the dysregulation. You know when it's time to feel one thing and you know when it's time to feel the other.
Yeah. No,
Sounds like
that's
healthy living to me.
Yeah, no, it's healthy living. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast. I know I talk a lot about it in therapy. There's this wonderful masculinity gender researcher, Ryan McKelly. He has a phenomenal TED talk on toxic masculinity and why we need to move away from that. But his big thing is he calls it the pact with the devil, where too many men, okay, a lot of men, including myself at times, we repress the negative emotions. We choose not to cry. We push away the shame. We stuff down the loneliness and all the other negative stuff. But in doing that, and this is why he calls it the pact with the devil, in doing that, we may feel like we're not as down as we actually are, but then we can't feel the positive emotions. Okay. We struggle feeling joy and goodness and ecstasy and excitement. And I can't tell you how many men come to therapy and they're like, I don't know what has happened to me. I feel like a fucking robot. I can't feel anything anymore. I've shut down the negative, but the positives have shut down too. Brene Brown also writes about this. She's done a ton of research showing that if you shut down the negative, you won't feel the positive. So I guess to connect it back to Morrie, I love that he has space for both.
You know
Genuinely
what, though?
both.
I see the opposite sometimes too. Like teenage girls and breakups. Where life, I don't even want to go to school. I don't even want to get out of bed. Guys do this too, especially teenage boys. I don't know if it's some of it's maturity, I think, maybe. But just getting really stuck in something that they're grieving. There's nothing wrong with grieving it. The thing is you can't grieve it all the time because then life passes you by. So it is healthy to feel the grief there, because I think the message given to especially teenagers is get over it. You weren't going to marry this person. They weren't going to be the right person for you. There'll be someone else. Just move on. That's not easy either. There has to be time to feel it deeply. And then there has to be time where you experience that there is still positive in the world and that things are just different, even though it's not what you expected.
Yeah. I love that. That's so good.
I think as humans, we just, tension of opposites. It's so important to acknowledge the good and the bad. Otherwise, you get stuck in the good or you get stuck in the bad. And neither one of those places is a good place to be all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So I have one last question for you. And I think we should end with Jesus.
Jesus?
Yeah, right?
We're
with
ending with
Jesus. Jesus.
I love me some Jesus.
Okay.
What would Jesus do?
I don't know. Actually, what would Morrie do? Now,
Right?
So as you were talking and then, just throwing out the idea of the opposites one more time, I thought about, Jesus's line around, do not judge lest you be judged. Okay.
Mm.
And so is there a sense in which this idea of holding space for the opposites, not either or, but both, also gets at this idea of why, as a people, we should, and by people, I don't just mean Christians, I mean as fucking humans, as we think about our own culture, our own nation, as Americans, why shouldn't we judge? How is that connected to this space where we're holding the opposites?
Because we all have our own shit.
There you go.
It's so easy to pick someone else. Oh, one of the most powerful stories in the Bible is when they're ready to stone that woman.
Yes.
And Jesus picks up a stone too, and he says, let
he who has not sinned throw the first stone.
How powerful is that?
Yeah.
Because I know, like, they all dropped their stones, didn't they?
They did. Yeah. Yeah.
Because we've all sinned. My sin might be different than yours, so it's so easy for me to pick up on your sin and point fingers and be like, oh my God, I would never do that.
Yes.
But you could easily turn around and say, well, I would have never done that.
Yeah.
We're vulnerability and being human. We got to give each other space to just love and
Yeah.
just be who we are, and to understand that I always see the good in people, which maybe is to a fault, but I also believe
I'm glad, because I'm glad you do that with me, because I have a lot of bad.
Well, both of us, right? It goes both ways. But at the end of the day, like, we all have our shit. It's just different. And so it's real easy for us to pick up on someone else's stuff and be like, well, I would never do that. But you know what? They'd never do the crap that I did.
Yeah.
It's we live our lives, and until you're in a particular situation, making a particular choice, it's very easy to judge. I see it all the time in, like, say, divorces.
Ooh.
People who are like, I would never get divorced. I make my marriage work. Well, but maybe you've never been in a situation that made that become a real topic of discussion. And so it's very easy to, like, judge a situation that you've never been in and be like, well, I would never make that decision. But the thing is, you just knowing how life goes, you end up in a situation where you go, holy crap, all that judgment I did before, I think I might make that same decision. I don't know.
Absolutely.
We're all human. Why can't we just love each other? That's one of the things, my favorite things about this book is the love that Morrie and, help me out here.
Mitch.
And Mitch have for each other, even though they live very, very different lives.
Hey, love wins, right?
Right? Like a sports writer who's in a very busy life who can't commit versus a man who's a Jewish man who is very loving and kind and makes all the time in the world for things, yet they can admire, they have mutual admiration and love each other.
Yes. Yes. It's a mutual, vulnerable, connected, loving relationship. And I think it's what men need to aspire to. It's what I want to aspire to. As we think about 2023, I'm not really big on, what is it? New Year's resolutions, because all the research that shows people don't actually go through with them. But I think if I have a hope for myself, is that I am more intentional about cultivating relationships with others. I want to cultivate this alternative community, this alternative culture that he's talking about, that's marked by love and tenderness and real, quote unquote, manly strength, which is actually the self-control and the inner power to love and to be vulnerable and to show kindness, rather than explode, in anger and brute force.
Maybe being kinder today than I was yesterday.
I like that. And, kinder to myself too.
Absolutely. I think it's the one thing that's
and maybe
missing.
Kinder to the pug.
Mm-hmm. He is over here sleeping, and
There he
I'm
is.
angry that I picked him up. But
Come
he's
here.
all nice and warm. He's been snoring the whole time. I'm so glad. If you haven't heard from him, then you're lucky, because I've been hearing him the whole time.
Okay. All right, Amy. I think we're at a point to end. I would like to look through some more quotes, because I think there's quite a bit more material that Morrie gets into, even some of his kind of Buddhist leaning, some of his stuff on emotion and detachment. He has a lot to say about, like, finding meaning in life. He kind of critiques the obsession with like money and capitalism. There's some things that we need to talk about. So maybe,
Morrie part 2.
yeah, Morrie part 2. Okay. All right. Well, would you mind ending with the line of the podcast, which is to continue the conversation?
Continue the conversation.
All right.
Let's
Thank you.
do this.